Hello and welcome to this Japan Society webinar, one of our regular series on topics in current affairs and business. My name is Bill Emmott, and as many of you know, I have the honor of chairing the Japan Society. Our topic today is cyber security. It is a subject that is at the same time deeply technical, both in its cyber dimensions and its security ones, but also fundamentally important in every aspect of our lives. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it must be that drastic events that experts warn us of can in fact happen. And recent events that have been drastic for their targets, such as the cyber and ransomware attacks that have disabled health services, including among others at different times, the NHS and the Irish health system, have shown us the vulnerability of all of our IT systems, even if they have also shown our ability to respond. Today, we will have the privilege of hearing from two speakers who are highly expert on this issue, Marcus Willett from the UK and Mihoko Matsubara from Japan. Before introducing them properly, I want to quote from a recent major report that Marcus masterminded for the International Institute for Strategic Studies, where he is Senior Advisor for Cyber, and in full disclosure, for which I also act as Chairman of the Trustees. The report was called Cyber Capabilities and National Power, and I want to quote from it because it provides a far better introduction to the topic than I could possibly do. To quote, "State cyber operations to reconnoiter and gain a presence on relevant networks are occurring every second and are now a permanent feature of cyberspace." And cyberspace has become, perhaps inevitably, a key and risky new environment for statecraft and competition between states in the 21st century. It has also become a major, and arguably the major, domain for organized crime. Since 2017, there has been a surge in reported losses from ransomware, which has totaled tens of billions of dollars. The damage done by the various types of cybercrime has inevitably led to a new world of litigation, regulatory fines, and insurance claims. In addition, terrorist groups such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda aspire to become more cyber capable, as do political activist groups. All this is, quotes, fueling the growth of a globalized cyber industrial sector. So it is a political story, a business story, a technological story, a social story, and much else besides. And to explore those implications, we welcome, as I said, two expert speakers. The aforementioned Marcus Willett spent a 33-year career at the UK's Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, a key part of our intelligence network. Marcus rose to become the deputy head of the organization. He was GCHQ's first Director Cyber and has led several major UK government cyber initiatives, as well as holding posts across the wider UK intelligence and security community. When he left government in 2018, he joined the IISS, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, as well as now providing advice to a very wide range of organizations at home and abroad. And in Japan, I'm delighted to welcome Mihoko Matsubara, Chief Cybersecurity Strategist at NTT Corporation in Tokyo. Mihoko worked at the Japanese Ministry of Defense for 9 years before pursuing an MA at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. She then worked at Pacific Forum CSIS in Honolulu as a fellow before joining Hitachi Systems as cybersecurity analyst, and later Intel in Tokyo as cybersecurity policy director, and then now from 2018 at NTT. I'm going to ask both our speakers to give opening remarks of up to 10 minutes, following which I will open discussion and, most importantly, your questions. Marcus will be emphasizing global cyber issues, while Mihoko will focus on Japan and on the potential for UK-Japan collaboration. So it makes most sense to open with Marcus Willett. Over to you, Marcus, and welcome to the Japan Society.
Well, thank you very much, Bill, for that kind introduction and for those quotes from our study. I remember some of those words very well. And hello to everybody on the call. Yes, I'm going to do just a quick tour d'horizon on cyber, which I'm going to cover basically 6 brief points. The first one you've already alluded to, Bill, is the criminal use of ransomware. As our National Cybersecurity Centre has recently reported, in the UK, we have seen a record number of cyber incidents in the last year, dominated by criminal ransomware attacks originating from Russia. We mean criminal hackers seizing control of corporate data and demanding cryptocurrency for its return. Of course, one of the world's most notorious ransomware attacks occurred in May in the US when Colonial Pipeline was hacked, with the company admitting having to pay a $5 million ransom. Beyond the money, it illustrated how serious the consequences of an attack on a country's critical national infrastructure could be. But there are many, many other examples. What to do about such cyber criminality? Debates are raging worldwide about regulating regulating to make the reporting of breaches compulsory, about regulating against the paying of ransoms, disrupting the criminal business model, for example, chasing and disrupting the cryptocurrency element, hacking back, for example, using Cyber Command in the US and the UK National Cyber Force, the US offering rewards of up to $10 million for information identifying leaders of certain criminal groups, massive dilemmas for the insurance companies and those seeking insurance. In all of this hullabaloo, though, it remains absolutely critical that companies and governments do not take their eye off the need to implement basic cybersecurity measures. Good and tested anti-phishing protocols for staff, good patching and password policies, careful data access controls, and the like. That is still the best goal line defense. But we do need something more strategic. I think we must be much stronger about what international law already says about the responsibility of states. The degree to which there is or isn't coordination between the hosting state and the criminals is irrelevant. If the criminals are seriously damaging another country, simply by knowing about it, the hosting state is committing an internationally wrongful act if it fails to address the problem within its borders. If it doesn't, it faces legitimate countermeasures from any state affected. This must be the tack for the ongoing US-Russia dialogue on this issue. Second point, I think we're all still grappling with the implications of the SolarWinds hack in the US. To be clear, the SolarWinds hack was a sophisticated state-based Russian operation exploiting complex IT supply chains for the purposes of gathering data, i.e. espionage. It was a spying phishing trip. It was not, as some commentators have labelled it, an act of war. Again, I think there is a growing body of expert opinion that basic cybersecurity measures would have greatly limited the effectiveness of that Russian operation. But I think there are two other vital lessons. Firstly, sadly, companies and governments must always assume a few hacks will be sophisticated enough to get through. This means focusing on policies for incident response and recovery, including the handling of the news media, but more strategically, how you store and replicate data to build in redundancy and resilience, minimizing the impact of such hacks and shortening the time and effort it takes to recover. Second, know your supply chain and be more demanding of the companies in it. For example, demand independently audited evidence that they have implemented basic cybersecurity measures. If this had been demanded of SolarWinds by its clients, the Russian operation would have died at birth. Third point, proliferation of sophisticated and dangerous cyber capabilities. This is a big worry and takes many forms. One is the failure of states to protect some of their most powerful secret tools. The most well-known example of this is the insider leak of a widespread vulnerability in Microsoft Windows, Eternal Blue, from inside the US National Security Agency, which subsequently played a role in at least North Korean hacks against the global banking system and Russian hacks against Ukraine. Some states also seem to knowingly allow or turn a blind eye to the proliferation of their sophisticated cyber capabilities, as it appears Israel did with the sale to numerous states of some powerful spyware developed by the Israeli company NSO Group. Powerful capabilities can also proliferate as a result of reckless use by states, with a prime example being the brazen way in which earlier this year, Chinese intelligence operations revealed a number of IT vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange servers, leaving them wide open to other state actors and to criminal groups, any one of which could have used the open door to conduct a damaging cyber attack. We also have that chain reaction, where cyber criminals become more sophisticated by copying states until they are sophisticated enough to be copied by states. The North Koreans started using ransomware techniques developed by cyber criminals years ago. During the last year, and learning from the likes of Colonial Pipeline, the Iranians have started doing the same. The spectre here, of course, is that a powerful capability ends up in the hands of a truly reckless actor, like an international terrorist group. I'm not arguing for some massive international arms control treaty here. That just wouldn't work for a host of reasons. Rather, it again plays to the responsibility of individual states under existing international law and established norms of behavior. Fourth point, the problem with thresholds. All states should agree that international law applies to cyberspace in peacetime and during armed conflict. The problem is that there is a lack of clarity over how the thresholds in international law apply to cyber operations. When is a cyber operation a coercive intervention, a use of force, an armed attack, and what thresholds are required for attribution? And I'm afraid I don't think the internationally agreed voluntary norms of behavior, as currently formulated, have helped in that regard. Instead, I fear they just added another layer of complexity, particularly around whether critical national infrastructure, however defined, can be targeted or not. This is all being exploited by some states who are operating in this so-called grey zone below what they think anyone would perceive as a use of force, including attempts to meddle in, for example, presidential and parliamentary elections of other states. But they could get this horribly wrong. It is obvious that we have a dangerous situation when the President of the United States says publicly that it will most likely be a cyber breach that results in the US finding itself in a real shooting war with a major power. Those were his words. Fifth point, responsible cyber actors. This is really part of the solution to number 4. You will see the UK advocating its use of responsible power in cyberspace, of being a responsible cyber actor. Other liberal democratic states talked about responsible freedom of maneuver. It means the US, UK, and their allies intend to continue to develop and use offensive cyber capabilities according to their strategic objectives in both peace and war, but they will do so responsibly in line with international law and established norms of acceptable behavior. But I think they need to define more succinctly what they mean to try and arrive at a more coherent international acceptance of what responsible as opposed to irresponsible cyber operations are. Personally, I would concentrate more on how such operations are conducted rather than losing ourselves in the maze of defining which targets are legitimate. There is plenty in international law that helps on this. So operations must be assiduously monitored, commanded and controlled, appropriately surgical and well targeted, with situational awareness retained in the preparatory phase and for the duration of the operation itself, to ensure such operations are proportionate, discriminate, necessary to avoid unintended consequences. So the firing and forgetting of uncontrolled computer worms through global IT vulnerabilities would be irresponsible and would likely result in an internationally wrongful act, resulting in the legitimate resort to countermeasures by the injured states. States can be much, much more direct and clear about this. Sixth and finally, there is a bigger issue. Today, citizens, companies, governments, states all rely on the internet. It underpins agriculture, food distribution, banking, healthcare, transport, water supply, energy. It is fundamental to the global economy, to international security and influence, and to the global spread of ideas. It is a domain where armed forces must be able to fight, whether we like it or not. With new technologies like smart cities, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, this dependence is only going to deepen, and the attack surface for malign activity will just grow exponentially. So there is a massive superpower competition going on for control of the internet, both the technology underpinning it and how it is governed and used. And I would suggest that for the authoritarian states, it is defensive and born of fear. fear of the spread of liberal ideas into their societies, and fear that perceived US digital technical superiority gives it a substantial edge if it were ever to come to an armed conflict. There are so many facets to this. Sometimes they become very visible, like the US use of its domination of microchip technology to completely hamstring Huawei's efforts to dominate global mobile phone technology. As an aside, the UK is keen to learn more from the Japanese experience of developing open architectures as a mitigation in all of this. And I've certainly seen some excellent initiatives from Japanese companies. Competition over undersea cables, data storage, and cloud computing is also becoming increasingly evident. But the battle is also taking place in obscure UN working groups, in the arcane multi-stakeholder processes used to establish technical standards for the internet, dominated by the US, Europe, and Japan for so long, but not now. The process is used to assign internet domain names, and so many more. It is also happening in the academic and startup communities of the US, UK, Japan, and elsewhere, as those states seek to protect their vital national intellectual property on artificial and quantum, for example, from acquisition by especially the Chinese. It is very hard to see where this will all lead. The continuation of an open, interoperable, reliable internet allowing the free flow of information that we know today, governed by an equal partnership of governments and companies and with thoroughly entangled technology, or a shadow of the same, with far greater government control and surveillance of especially the flow of data and information, or two internets, or several. The Russians and Iranians are both experimenting with their own national internets, while China's Great Firewall has been around for a while. My bet and hope is that all efforts at splintering the internet will fail, because in the 21st century, the disadvantages of such a splintering for all states so massively outweigh any advantage. But I'm afraid we are stuck with a stark reality. Cyberspace is a battleground, perhaps the main battleground for 21st century interstate competition. All companies and governments will have a role to play. And I'll leave it there, Bill, and hand back to you.
Thank you, Marcus, for a marvelously comprehensive view of those 6 points, those 6 problems, quite chilling in many ways, but raises all sorts of questions, including that one about the splintering of the internet that you finished with. Well, let's hear from Mihoko Matsubara from Japan, the Japanese perspective on this, and then we'll come to discussion and questions. And I invite the audience to put questions into the Q&A function at any time. Mihoko Matsubara, welcome likewise to you.
Thank you, Bill, for having me. So I thank you, Marcus, for your excellent overview of the global cyber threats. So now I'd like to highlight what kind of cybersecurity challenges Japan has been facing and dealing with over the last few years, and especially the course of 2021. So first, I'd like to give you some statistics. So as Marcus excellently overviewed the global cybersecurity challenges on ransomware attacks and the supply chain risk management, but how exactly we have been damaged by cyber attacks? So actually back in 2020, already 7% of our global GDP was lost by cybercrime. Think about it. 7%, it's a huge number. It's even larger than a national GDP. And it will continue to grow if we do not take basic cyber hygiene measures or cyber protection. And this is only about cybercrime by cyber criminals. I'm not talking about cyber espionage or cyber disruptive activities by state-sponsored actors. So if we include state-sponsored actors, cyber disruptions and election interference or cyber espionage, this figure will become even larger. So Japan has been tackling with this grave threat over the last few years, especially after Tokyo was selected to host Tokyo 2020. I understand that London and the UK government and industry, and also accelerated its efforts to enhance the UK national cybersecurity capabilities to make sure to make the London 2012 Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games successful. So same thing happened for Tokyo 2020. So the Japanese industry, especially NTT, NEC, and Hitachi, came up with this idea, a cross-sector forum back in 2015. Because to make cybersecurity successful for any events or any positive legacy beyond Tokyo 2020, you have to have a good technology and process, but of course you have to have a good people. But when you talk about cybersecurity talents, we are talking about all sorts of different types of people. Are you talking about help desk? Are you talking about a cyber threat intelligence analyst? Or are you talking about chief information security officer or auditor? So each type of cybersecurity professionals have to have a totally different types of skill sets. So the first task of the Japanese cross-sector forum, consisting of 43 critical infrastructure companies in Japan, was to define what cybersecurity professionals are and what kind of missions they are expected to achieve based upon the NIST cybersecurity framework, because cyber attacks are global and borderless, and you have to collaborate with many different types of governments and industry around the world. So you have to have a global common language. And also, once you define what cybersecurity professionals are, you have to have a good ecosystem to educate, hire, train, and retain cybersecurity professionals within the industry, but also in collaboration with academia to educate people, but also the government to have a good cybersecurity national strategy. So the cross-sector forum has been really proactive to come up with these definitions and also to cultivate our next generation cybersecurity professionals being invited by the government to shape the national cybersecurity strategy and policies, and also has been invited to multiple NIST cybersecurity conferences to share the unique applications of the Japanese way to use the NIST cybersecurity framework. And some of the member companies have been sponsoring universities' cybersecurity courses for graduate schools and also undergraduate schools. But again, cybersecurity borderless efforts. So you have to have domestic efforts, but you also have to have bilateral, multilateral, and global efforts. So you have to share cyber threat intelligence to understand what kind of risks you are facing, and you also have to test your capabilities. So Japanese ICT ISAC, or Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, and have been collaborating with the American counterparts, like US IT ISAC, over the last multiple years. But they finally institutionalized their collaboration 2 years ago to share cyber threat intelligence and also best practices in Tokyo. But you also have to have collaboration beyond a bilateral framework. So the 2021 has been a really important year for the Japanese cybersecurity history in 5 ways. So first, for the first time, the Japanese government and industry officially participated in the NATO cyber exercise. So NATO CCDCOE, or Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, annually hosts cyber exercise in Tallinn, Estonia. But this year they had to do it virtually due to the pandemic. So Japan, for the first time in history, they participated in this important exercise, but they teamed up with the US. And not only, because the US military has many military people based in Europe, and considering the time difference between Japan, the United States, and Europe, it would be much more convenient for them to send Europe military forces stationed in Europe. However, they chose to send Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii. So it means that the US and Japan really considers the alliance very important, and also they realize the importance to test their collaborative cyber response capabilities for free and open Indo-Pacific. And this NATO CCD-COE cyber exercise scenario also always use Crimsonia, a fictional state in combination of Russia and China, to launch multi-staged and cyber attacks on different parts of critical infrastructure. So not only the military, but also civilian agencies and critical infrastructure companies have to work together to tackle with this complicated scenario. And I am so proud to see that, even though that it was the first time participation for the Japanese side to participate in this NATO CCD-COE exercise, they decided to send not only the military, but also the civilian agency and the critical infrastructure companies. And secondly, for the first time, the Japanese government did the standalone public attributions of a massive cyber espionage attempts against 200 Japanese organizations, including JAXA, in April 2002. April 22, and National Police Agency concluded that it is highly likely that the Chinese hacker group TIC and the PLA unit 61419 were involved in these cyber espionage attempts against 200 Japanese companies and governmental organizations. And this National Police Agency, the statement highlighted that Japanese attribution efforts had attracted a lot of attentions from the foreign intelligence community. The National Police Agency's then Commissioner General Matsumoto didn't elaborate on what kind of foreign intelligence community was interested in Japanese efforts, but it sounds like the Japanese government has been already proactive to share their insights to contribute to the global cyber resiliency and cyber defense. And of course, we must not forget the Tokyo 2020. And it has been challenged by COVID-19 pandemic over the last 2 years, and Japan had to postpone this important event for 1 year. However, Japan had some advantages because we are able to host 2 large international events, Osaka G20 Summit and Rugby World Cup, to test our incident response capabilities and also cyber threat intelligence capabilities in collaboration with many countries, including, of course, the United Kingdom. And even though that the Tokyo 2020 faced unprecedented number of cyber attack attempts, actually we detected 450 million cyber attack attempts, but we are able to block all of them. So no disruptions happened to the operations during the Tokyo 2020 games. So Dr. Brian Gantz contributed on an article to Security Magazine in this August, and he gave a rave review of Tokyo 2020 cybersecurity. And this is totally a success story due to the aggressive preemptive measures. So as a Japanese citizen, I am so proud to see this success, and I am hoping to see more sharing of success stories between Japan and the UK, and also the lessons learned to share for the success of Paris 2024, Los Angeles 2028, and Brisbane 2032. So now Japanese government updates cyber security strategy every 3 years. And also these strategies declare that we have to take advantage of our success stories from Tokyo 2020s for the future major events. for including Osaka Expo, and also we have to deepen our collaboration with our international partners, and also we have to ensure the risk management for supply chain, as Marcus mentioned. And finally, I have found it's very intriguing. For the first time, the Japanese Defense White Paper highlighted the importance of signal intelligence for cybersecurity, and also cybersecurity for free and Indo-Pacific. So because Marcus is an alum of the GCHQ, he already knows that why intelligence capabilities, and especially the signal intelligence capabilities, are indispensable for national cybersecurity. However, the major difference between the Japanese and other major national powers in cybersecurity, Japan doesn't necessarily openly talk about intelligence capabilities for cybersecurity. But however, 2021 version of the Japanese Defense White Paper decided to talk about, even though it's briefly that they talked about the intelligence capabilities are needed for cybersecurity capabilities. So I think that these 5 historical events in the history of 2021 Japanese cybersecurity, I think that Japan is ready to change and for the better cybersecurity, and to be a better cybersecurity partner for many different countries. So what kind of next steps we have to take? So Japan obviously has started to do public attributions and intelligence sharing with other governments, including intelligence community. So I'm expecting to see more to come. And to do that, we also have to have a good supply chain risk management, not only for the basic ICT, but also 5G and beyond. And this has to be done through Alliance, Quad, AUKUS, G7, G20, but also because London and Tokyo have already experienced the successful Summer Olympic Games. So we can share a lot on our success stories for other the Summer Olympic Games host cities like Paris, Los Angeles, and Brisbane. And these cybersecurity capabilities are not only needed for national security, but also indispensable for economic security. And I see that lots of the similarities between cyber security and COVID-19 pandemic, because both virus, COVID-19 virus and computer virus are invisible, and they do not go away, even though we really hate them. And we have to have a good basic hygiene, but 100% protection is impossible. So that's why we have to have an early detection. Incident response capabilities are important, as Marcus already mentioned, and we have to contain the expansion of infection by our own, but also through bilateral and multilateral collaboration. And of course, we have to have a good talent to deal with them, but we also have to make sure that every single one of us understands the importance of security in COVID-19 pandemic management, but also in cybersecurity. But it's already so stressful over the last 2 years. So we have to have a good stress management and leaders' visions so that we can keep fighting, and then we have a good fight to have a good cyber hygiene and also during this pandemic. So thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from the audience.
Thank you very much, Matsubara-san, Mihoko-san, for that very interesting penetration of Japanese policy and of the evolution of Japanese policy. I think it was particularly interesting to me, and I'm sure to our audience, about the success with Tokyo 2020 And I think in our questions, we may well explore some of the background to that success, the ingredients of that success as a way to share experience for others. But let me open 2 questions. Again, I invite people to put their questions into Q&A as they see fit. And the first one I'm going to pick on actually is where I would have started as well, so I'll go straight into that, which is about ransomware and about how companies, but also government organizations, because many of the targets of ransomware have indeed been government organizations as well, should respond to ransomware attacks. An anonymous attendee writing question has said, I have heard that in cybersecurity training sessions, companies are often unofficially advised that in the event of a ransomware incident, it is, quote, better to pay the ransom, as the reputational and financial ramifications of a data leak would almost always outweigh the cost of paying up. Is this correct? And if so, how do we counter this? To which I might just add to both our speakers, what's your advice to companies in these circumstances, how to weigh up the costs? I know, I'll start with you, Marcus, because you also recommended that there was a case for government requirements for reporting of such payments, which I think would help to alter some of the balance of costs to benefits if it existed. What do you say to companies?
Well, I think this is a really tricky area. As I alluded to, the debating about whether there should be government regulation against the paying of ransoms, it has been backwards and forwards. In the UK, the position is that really companies should not pay ransoms, but we're not regulating because we recognize, and the questioner implies this, there are some instances where a company really cannot recover properly. It would break the company, and it probably is in the company's best interest to pay the ransom, but it only fuels the problem. The best, I would say that paying ransom is no guarantee that you will get your data back. There are plenty of examples of that not happening. Plenty of examples of paying ransoms and your data being leaked all over the place anyway. And if you look at the reputational and financial damage of some of these sorts of operations, the strategic solution really is to think very carefully about, and Miho has referred to this, and so have I, is start with your basic cybersecurity, assume that will stop 95% of what's coming your way, and then build in resilience and redundancy to handle the final 5%. And then ask lots of questions of governments about how they are dealing with internationally with the likes of Russia, who are hosting a lot of these cyber criminals, to try and sort this out at source, is what I think the best approach really needs to be.
Thank you, Marcus. Mihoko-san, what do you say to companies? What do you or your colleagues say to companies who consult you?
Sure. So I actually heard that a few years ago, some companies were advised to pay up and then get data back. But over the last few years, especially after the Colonial Pipeline incident, I don't think that no one wants to pay ransoms to aid cyber criminals to launch another vicious ransomware attack on different victims. And as Marcus mentioned, there's no guarantee that you can recover your data and you can resume your business operations. And in fact, that Sophos, UK-based cybersecurity company, found out that even if you pay a ransom, only 8% of those victims that paid a ransom have been able to recover all of the data encrypted. Only 8%. So there's no return. And also, even if you pay, you still have to pay for your recovery. And you also have to investigate, and you have to work with law enforcement and your business partners and impact affected customers. So you almost double your recovery cost. And also, especially after the Colonial Pipeline and JBS incidents, there are more sanctions against cyber criminals. So you are also risking reputational damage by helping cyber criminals. So for all those reasons, I do not advise for paying up.
And how, I mean, just as a supplementary question, how active, perhaps starting with you in Japan, Mihoko, how active is the government in both guiding companies, but also responding on ransomware? Because I mean, as an economist, I'll add that in a way, cybercrime is not a loss to GDP. It's unfortunately a redistribution of GDP, of money from one set of hands to another. But of course, from a government point of view, it's a redistribution from taxpayers to non-taxpayers, just like with drug crime and other forms of organized crime. So it's definitely a big loss to governments, especially if this happens, as well as it crippling companies. What does really the Japanese government, how is their response to actually this corporate problem of ransomware?
So almost 1 year ago, the Japanese government, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry issued an open letter to business executives to advise not to pay a ransom, even if they are hit by a ransomware attack. And they said that because of the changing legislations around the world, paying up means that the victim might face sanctions from a foreign government, and also because there's increasing risks of ransomware attacks from different actors, and the government listed specific actions to take to enhance their cyber hygiene to protect themselves from ransomware attacks.
Thank you. And Marcus, in the UK and elsewhere, I mean, you talked about, of course, the state-to-state talks about, in effect, making other states take responsibility for organized crime groups, and indeed seeing those organized crime groups as tacit agents of state policy in some respects. How active are governments, in your experience, in responding to this?
So I think governments are increasingly active in trying to ensure basic levels of cybersecurity increased across both the public and private sectors. So this includes, as you'll see, measures in the states about the reporting of breaches that I've already alluded to. You'll also see things about the awarding of government contracts with bits of the private sector based on certain standards of cybersecurity. So there's a whole raft of stuff that governments are doing to try and encourage better cybersecurity across all sectors. Governments are also, frankly, looking at all their levers of power, whether that's their own cyber capabilities to go after some of these actors, whether it's what they can do about the economic models, particularly around cryptocurrency. So I think if you're sitting in the UK and you are greatly exercised about the strategic issues around espionage and control of the internet that I've already alluded to, but the most pressing and urgently damaging bit of cyberspace at the moment is its use by criminal groups for ransomware, using ransomware. So that is the top strategic issue. So that's why Biden is sitting down with President Putin and talking about Russian ransomware groups. It's that big. Yeah,
no, that's very important. Now let me move on for a bit. We'll probably come back to ransomware, but let me move towards actually your point really about responsible state actors and that issue, in effect, the definition of responsibility. Nicholas McLean has asked, I think, an interesting question. Was the Stuxnet operation against Iran responsible? And have the results of it proved counterproductive? Using that, if you like, worked example, as far as we know about it, how does that fit into your thinking, Marcus?
Yes, I think it is a very interesting example. And to be honest, I have that partly in my mind because, irrespective of it not being confirmed publicly who actually was behind Stuxnet. So don't read anything I say as being confirmation either way. Nevertheless, it was a surgical controlled operation. Now, it did spread beyond the particular target, but it was only going to affect you if you were running a bit of specialized kit to run a centrifuge spin. So in terms of its command and control, it being surgical, a discriminate effect, it fits into my category of what a responsible cyber operation should look like. I will add another point about Stuxnet. Lots of people worry about the damage that is done by cyber operations. Here's an example of an operation that was conceived to interfere with a weapons program and achieve a result without having to resort to kinetic damage, the dropping of bombs and the like. So a surgical operation without death and destruction to achieve a very specific aim. So yes, I am putting Stuxnet in the category of a responsible use of a cyber capability, as opposed to WannaCry, NotPetya, which were computer worms fired through IT vulnerabilities by first case North Korea and the second case Russia. I think you've got the two ends of the spectrum, to be honest.
Right, no, that's very revealing. Mihoko-san, Alison Beale has asked a question. Thank you for a very important session. Matsubara-san, what are your thoughts on the new digital agency in Japan? How pertinent is that to this cyber security issue?
Thank you. So I understand that the Japanese newly established digital agency aims to digitize on operations on the platform that the Japanese central government owns. So on Japan, the Japanese government already has central governmental agencies that is responsible for cybersecurity and also public-private partnerships and international collaboration on cybersecurity that is called NISC. So the digital agencies and the Japanese NISC, which is equivalent to the UK versions of National Cybersecurity Center or NCSC, will work hand in hand to enhance Japanese digitization, but also Japanese cybersecurity.
And how far is it developed? I mean, how far has it got, do you think? Is it, because we all think of it as being really started 1 year ago, or, how long before we will really see its impact?
Oh, the Japanese digital agency was just launched only a couple months ago. So it's only in a burgeoning stage.
Yes, okay, yes, exactly, yeah. So these are things for the future. Now, Mark, a slightly different topic. Mark Carvell has asked, and I'll start with you, Mihoko-san. Is the increased level of Chinese industry involvement in digital standards development, e.g. an Internet Engineering Task Force, creating new risks, or is it creating useful opportunities for engaging China on solutions to threats? How do you see this question about digital standards development?
To be honest, I'm not that familiar with international standardizations on IT. However, I can say that because digitizations are connected all over the world, so you have to work with many different industrial organizations, trade associations, the ITU, and also the many different governments. So, So it means that the international standardization efforts cannot be done unilaterally, and you have to work with many stakeholders internationally. So I do not think that this would be done by only one specific country.
Marcus, how do you see China's role in this regard about digital standards?
I think in about 2015, so from 2015 onwards, China recognized that it was missing a point about how what advantages you could get, and frankly, what advantages the US, Europe, and Japan had previously through getting particular standards for particular coming technology. It gave a leg up for your particular solutions and your vision for how that technology should work. And so nowadays, look at the 3G partnership project, 3GPP, which designs the specifications that underpin, despite its name, also 4G, 5G, 6G mobile communications. The delegations to that are dominated now by the China. They dwarf any other delegation. And that's how Huawei was able to steal a bit of a march, really, around 5G technology. So I think they look like very, I think I said in my opening spiel, arcane processes. It looks very technical, buried in the detail of the internet. But I think China's realized that that's the place you can gain a real advantage. I also referred to domain name allocations, and so Russia has put a candidate to take over the Secretary Generalship of the ITU, which sits above a lot of these standards groups, is looking to abolish ICANN, which is the currently, as they view, US-dominated group that allocates domain names around the, that which, the Russians view as a way of the US being able to basically isolate a particular country from the internet if they wanted to. So, these arcane processes are really quite powerful ones. And I think the Russians and Chinese have realized this and are now playing the game.
And is that a threat, or is it just that they are, as it were, competing for the best ideas?
I think, how can I put this? I think what they're doing is this is much more moderate than saying what we need is big new international treaties around arms control. It's rather saying, hold on, everybody, is it right that we have a way of allocating domain names dominated by the US? Wouldn't it be better to have, is it right, for example, that the UN working group that is looking at a lot of these norms of behavior is restricted to, I think, what is it, about 20 states? Wouldn't it be better to have an open-ended working group involving 193 states of the United Nations, which is what the Russians have successfully done? Underneath all of this, of course, is an attempt to develop a different set of standards, a different set of governance that puts more emphasis on government control of cyberspace. Cyber sovereignty is what it's referred to. And in the end, the export of these sorts of standards and this sort of governance through things like China's Digital Silk Road program allows states to greater control content in their bit of cyberspace and, frankly, surveil their citizens. It's a chilling version of what cyberspace could become. And that's what's at stake.
Very clear. Thank you. Yes. Perhaps to you, Mihoko, Nicholas McLean asked another question about cybersecurity cooperation with Japan. He says, is the UK on a par with both the US and the EU? And if not, which are the specific areas where UK cooperation with Japan could be increased?
So the cybersecurity collaboration between Japan and the United Kingdom have been really special, especially Tokyo 2020 and London 2012. So because the London Summer Olympic Games was held back in 2012, and 1 year later, Tokyo was selected to host the 2020 Summer Olympic and Paralympic Games in Tokyo. So I understand that, of course, that the US has been a close ally for security in general, and also cybersecurity, but the UK, because it's a successful host of the huge international event, London 2012. So London has been helping Japan to make Tokyo 2020 be successful. And Japan and the UK have been deepening our security collaborations, including joint exercises. And to do that, we have to have intelligence capabilities and intelligence exchanges. And you have to have a good information assurance and cybersecurity to share sensitive information between the two countries. So for that matter, I understand that Japan's UK cybersecurity collaborations has been really deep and getting even deeper and larger.
Marcus, how does that look from a UK point of view? With Japan not being a member of the Five Eyes, does that then put a kind of limit on how far real collaboration happens, or how is it seen from a UK government point of view?
Just to support what Mihoko has already said, cooperation across all aspects of cyber, security, the intelligence side, between the UK and Japan is very close. Five Eyes or not, the Five Eyes Alliance, obviously very strong and very close, but there are very close relationships by individual members of the Five Eyes nations with states beyond the Five Eyes, Japan being one, the UK also working closely with obviously European partners, and the closeness of those relationships and the closeness of the relationship with the UK and Japan is already close and is getting closer. We have, shared values, strengths that we both have that can help each other. I've already alluded to a while ago, the strength of Japan historically and presently around the development of digital technologies is, it's massive. There's a big advantage for both states to work closely together. And I see it. I saw it in my previous role and I see it now.
Good. Well, that's very encouraging. Perhaps we've just got 3 minutes left, but just as a final range of questions, artificial intelligence. How far is it being mobilized to increase the risk of effective cyber attacks? And perhaps one might turn it around as well to say, how far is AI being mobilized or relevant to defense against effective cyber attacks? And that's another good question from Nicholas McLean. Miho, would you like to kick off on that, and then I'll ask.
Sure. So artificial intelligence or machine learning capabilities are really helping cyber criminals and state-sponsored actors to accelerate their vicious efforts to launch cyber attacks. So they can more easily create variants of computer virus, and they can also even synthesize the voice of CEO to make a fake phone call to convince their subsidiary executives to transfer a large amount of money, because it sounds like the CEO's voice. And you can also more easily create spear phishing emails to convince the victims to click the attachment. So if you are using the machine learning capabilities or artificial intelligence to launch a better cyber attack, so the defenders also have to use the machine speed to defend ourselves from cyber attacks.
How do you see this arms race finally, Marcus? I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, it's firstly, arms race is a good good term. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing will all give advantages to both attackers and defenders. It won't make it easier to attack. Attacking is always very difficult, especially if you're dealing with a defender who has, has also developed the artificial intelligence and quantum to defend networks. The point here is if you're an attacker, you can fail 99 times and you get through once. That's you've succeeded. As a defender, you have to stop all of it. That's why I'm afraid artificial intelligence, quantum, whatever the new technology, as it's balanced on both sides, still the advantage is going to be ultimately with the attacker, because the attacker only has to get through once.
Thank you. No, that's a chilling reality, familiar to also questions about terrorism. They only have to get through once. So I thank Mihoko Matsubara and Marcus Willett very, very warmly for bringing great clarity to a very complicated but fantastically, massively important issue, one that we will, I'm sure, come back to time and again, because it's not going to go away. It is, as Miho said, a permanent part of life, rather, as unfortunately COVID-19 is a permanent part of life. We have to defend ourselves against it. So thank you to you both. Thank you to the audience for excellent questions and for participating. And thank you all for your support of the Japan Society. Thanks very much, Marcus and Miho.